Hey, Burnout Besties, welcome back to another episode of the Millennial Reset. We're starting off today with a triggering question. So, you ready for this? What are your goals? What are your goals? And let me just ask you, be honest with me. How many of us maybe struggle to answer that question right now? And if your hand is raised or you're nodding your head, I just want to let you know right off the bat that number one, you are 100% not alone. It is not just you, and it is okay. It is okay for you to not have a goal right now. And that's what we're talking this week on the Millennial Reset is millennials and our goals, or maybe, the lack thereof. And we are here to make sense of this, of why is it that we're feeling like this, so that hopefully you can walk away from today, if nothing else, feeling a little less pressure on yourself to, compete in the rat race and always have the next goal in mind for yourself. If you are new here, thank you for joining. I am your host, Peter Goose. I am a former teacher turned corporate burnout turned mindset burnout coach for other millennials that are all feeling this same sort of way. And super excited also today to have one of our millennial mental health besties, Kaylee, joining us for her debut on the Millennial Reset. Kaylee, welcome, welcome.
Thank you. I don't know if I realized that my intro is going to be very similar to yours because I'm a, therapist turned career coach turned something in between. And so I am so excited to be here because my heart is in helping millennials, especially kind of move from that place of burnout into a life of purpose because I
Yeah.
just feel like that's where we're so stuck right now is that purpose piece. So,
Yeah. And yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I was just talking to Kaylee too before we jumped on here of like, I just love that, yeah, we do kind of have similar stories, but I think that that's becoming more like of a commonality now. It's like we're giving ourselves that permission to just like figure out in our mid to late 30s what we want to do when we grow up. And,
Right.
it's okay
Yeah.
to change your mind and it's never too
Uh-huh.
late to, switch paths. So, super appreciate Kaylee being here to kind of give us her perspective on all things mental health for millennials as a therapist turned kind of career coach slash therapist for millennials as well. But yeah, if you're sitting here right now and you are realizing that, oh my gosh, yeah, you're right. Maybe I don't have any goals, then this episode is meant for you, besties. And I think one of the things that I want to make sure that we do before we kind of dive into the meat and potatoes of all this is just simply normalizing it. Can we
Hmm.
just normalize the fact that it is actually expected to not have goals right now? If you are like me and you are in that spot in your life where you have reached kind of this new level of burnout, your brain is literally not capable of being able to create goals or go after those goals, right? So like let's just normalize it first and foremost. And I think there's three big things that we're going to really talk about today in today's episode with Kaylee is that there's kind of these three main ingredients. And Kaylee, feel free to chime in here if there's maybe one that I'm even missing. But I think the first
Hmm.
one in terms of ingredients for achieving your goals, right, is you got to know the
Hmm.
goal. You got to have clarity on what is the thing that you are really trying to achieve. And we're going to dive into that in a few minutes here. And then number two is this whole idea of you got to have the dopamine. You got to have the motivation to be able to then go and achieve that goal. And then number three, which I think is where a lot of us are stuck at too, is you've got to have the you can call it energetic capacity, right? You've got to be able to have the energy reserves to be able to put forward the effort so that you can realize that goal. Kaylee,
Hmm.
anything else you would add to that list?
I mean, no, I would agree, and it's almost the opposite of what burnout is, right? Like with burnout, we run into that, we get more negative, we get more exhausted, and we even lose our ability to do our work well. And so you see the tie-in that it's about shifting that over to
Hmm.
that shift in focus and motivation and energy and everything.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, as Kaylee and I were talking about this, we were like, okay, how do we like make this make sense, right? And
Hmm.
I think one of the ways to really be able, before we talk about solutions and like what do we do about it, is I always say this all the time, is like, right, awareness always precedes meaningful action. If you're not aware of
Hmm.
like what has caused us to kind of get to this point, it's really hard to be able to solve for it. So that's how we're going to structure this first part is
Hmm.
let's kind of create the storyline here of the average everyday millennial. And let's go back to when we were like 18 years old, right? You're 18 years
Hmm.
old. It's time to decide what you're going to do when you graduate from high school. Maybe that's going and getting a degree, or maybe it's going and, learning a trade. But at that point in time, it was like, okay, got to pick what I'm going to do for the rest of my life.
Hmm.
And I think there's a couple things we can unpack there. One of the big ones, obviously, is how many of us made that choice by our own free will and intention versus maybe how many of us made that choice based on pressures and input from our parents and society. I know for me, my especially maybe not necessarily so much my parents, but my grandparents, they were like, we want you to be a
Hmm.
lawyer or a doctor. And I was like, I want to go into computer science. And they're like, okay, well, that's up and coming. So I picked computer science about a month before I went to college. Thank goodness. I was like, nope, I want to be a teacher. And I switched it last minute. But there was a lot
Hmm.
of that pressure. Kaylee, I'm sure you can resonate with that as well, growing up as a millennial too, and the
Yeah.
pressures.
And how linear it is when we're 18, where we go from getting done with high school and they actually, a lot of times the pressure is, okay, where do you want to go to school? We have the who do you want to be when you grow up is like early childhood pressure that we start with, but then it becomes linear of, okay, pick a school. Okay, you're in school, pick a major. Okay, now you figure out what you want to do with that major, which is just the exact opposite of
Mm-hmm.
what helps us get to any destination. And quite honestly, like careers change so frequently nowadays because the world changes so much and
Yeah.
so frequently that it's just not realistic anymore.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. I mean, we could do a whole other episode on just that right there, right? Is like
Yeah.
how many of us picked that degree based on what we thought the world would look like when we were
Hmm.
30 something years old versus, what the reality of it is now, where it's like, oh my gosh, like, now you can get a degree in all of these other areas that weren't even a possibility back then, right? It's just a
Hmm.
testament to how fast the world has changed for so much of us. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I mean, if we think back to again those years of deciding what you were going to do for the rest of life, at least once you picked that major, or once you picked that, career path for yourself, I feel like the motivation was high, right? We had
Right.
dopamine for days,
Hmm.
because we saw the potential of it. We saw the
Hmm.
picture painted by our parents and by society that says, hey, if you just do X, Y, Z, if you work really, really hard and get a good education behind you, you can have this American dream. You can have the white picket fence house in the suburbs. You can have the retirement plan. So we saw this, anticipation of the reward. Um,
Hmm.
and Kaylee, you and I kind of talked about this. I would love maybe more of your perspective on this, of just with this understanding of like motivation and how motivation works in the brain. Can you just give us kind of
Yeah.
like a quick little 2-minute rundown of like, how does motivation happen?
Okay, so my favorite thing about motivation is that we think it comes first when a lot of times it comes from the reinforcement of things. And so motivation within our brains is when we have this picture, we have this vision. And like you said, in college, we're given a vision, we're given a picture. And so we're like,
Yeah.
okay, I can grasp onto that. And then our brain system kicks on and it goes, okay, cool. I'm going to figure out how to amp myself up. There's kind of our blood pressure kicks on and it amps us up. And our part of our brain that's responsible for planning actually kicks on too to help us get to that destination. And it spends all this energy going, okay, I can do this. And then there's this third system that kicks on that's about finding signs, like proving that we're going on the right path. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's where people will joke, like, oh, I always look at the clock at 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a part of the brain that kicks on to reinforce that belief within yourself. So,
So interesting. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, that's exactly what's happening at that young age. We've got the picture painted
Mm-hmm.
in our head that says, okay, if I just do X, Y, Z, and if I follow the directions, here's what I can expect to receive. But then the
Mm-hmm.
story, we fast forward down the line to maybe into your, mid 20s to early 30s. And all of a sudden, we get to that point in our lives where we're like, okay, well, my parents were able to afford a house by this point in time in their lives. My parents were able to save for retirement. And now that I'm in that same place, the goalpost has moved. The housing
Mm-hmm.
market has gotten insane. Inflation is insane. And all of a sudden now it feels like for every step forward that we're taking, it feels like we're taking two steps back, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know for me at least, and I'm sure for many other millennials, at least the ones that I've, spoken to, is that that's where the guilt and shame sets in too, where we
Mm-hmm.
say, oh, maybe I should have just worked a little bit harder. Maybe I didn't work hard enough. Maybe I didn't
Mm-hmm.
pick the right degree. Where did
Mm-hmm.
I go wrong in all of this? The doubt bubbles up, right? And
Right.
I think this is where the brain begins to question it, right? Where it
Mm-hmm.
says, is all of this still worth it? So, yeah, Kaylee, from your experience in working with your clients, and you've worked with several millennials in your time as well, talk us through like what's the changes that are happening in the brain and the mind and the body during that time where we are not
Mm-hmm.
realizing the anticipated rewards.
Mm-hmm. So we will start to lose some of those same exact things that happen, right? Like so our that systolic blood pressure, the part that kind of amps us up, starts to decrease, and we're like, I don't know. I don't know about this anymore.
Yeah.
We also run into, I mean, a part of what you're saying that I just need to work harder and things like that, I think is born out of this the same belief. We're still holding on to that belief of if I work hard enough, I'll get there. And so we hold on to it long enough that we work harder, thinking, well, maybe I'm not working hard enough. So I'm going to keep working harder because I'm holding that belief
Mm-hmm.
until enough information. I think that the way I've heard it said is we have to have just a huge amount of information countering that belief. And then it just kind of crumbles where it's impossible for us to continue to believe that we can do that. And at that point, we have nothing supporting us. And we start to go, oh, it must have been me. Like it's all my fault. Um, because nobody
Yeah.
told us that there was so many systems working against us.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, I think that really kind of takes us into present day, right? Where so many of
Mm-hmm.
us are in that place where not only are we questioning whether or not the effort is worth the reward, but we're also completely maxed out, right? Now, at this
Mm-hmm.
point in time, not only do we not have goals anymore, but even if we did have goals, we don't have the mental or physical capacity because our brain and body and our mind are maxed out. There's no energy left, right?
Yeah,
And,
it's
yeah,
it's like if we had, I always say it's like if we were our phone batteries. You know, if we're at 50%, even we're okay.
yeah,
But we start to get to 20%, we're like, oh crap, like maybe I should start closing some apps. We get to 5% and we're in energy saving mode.
yeah.
And we don't want to do anything other than keep the phone on. We don't want to do anything other than keep ourselves functioning at the bare minimum at that point.
Hmm. And yeah, I know one of the big things that just like, I guess knowledge bombs that like changed the game for me was like, again, this whole idea of like how dopamine and motivation works in the brain. And
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're in that sustained fight or flight mode where so
Mm-hmm.
much of your energy is required for survival mode that there's
Mm-hmm.
literally not enough energy left for that logical thinking component of your
Mm-hmm.
brain that would normally be the part of your brain that sets goals and works to achieve them, it no longer
Mm-hmm.
has the energy required to be able to do its job properly. And so
Mm-hmm.
again, I only say that to make others feel like, again, it's not just you and you're not alone and there's nothing wrong with you. That's literally
Mm-hmm.
just how the brain works. And
Right.
yeah, I mean, when we're not only when we're in that sustained fight or flight mode for so long that we lose the motivation, but I think at least for me, that was also the time where um when the mid 20s to early 30s period where it's like, okay, I know I'm starting to burn out, but I don't know any other way because this belief system of
Right.
mine, this mindset tells me I just got to keep spinning. And that's the point in time where we begin to kind of lose touch with some of those things that maybe brought us dopamine before, the hobbies, the passions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at least where I was a couple of years ago in my burnout journey in my kind of mid to late 30s was there was no more hobbies and passions.
Mm-hmm.
Not only was there no energy for them, but I had spent so much of my career working towards this goal that I was burning myself out for that my
Mm-hmm.
identity became the work, right? I didn't have an
Right.
identity outside of a job title. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, Kaylee, I'm sure you could speak to that for days, but
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you though to tell the story that you were telling me about earlier about kind of like your not only your own journey but also your husband's journey with this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So my journey, probably, I will say my journey in many ways going up until maybe like 20s was pretty smooth. I was fortunate to have like parents who said do what you need to do kind of thing, but at some point I buckled down. I did that thing where I was like, well, I just got to work harder and harder. So I got caught in the harder and harder a little bit later, where my burnout hit, late 20s, early 30s, where it hits right in that spot, but it felt like it was a little delayed. My husband's story, I always joke like he never should have gone to college, but not because he's brilliant, but he went to college for a degree because of parents saying, well, you should go to college because it's good to go to college. It was kind of a
hmm
why not mentality. And then it was, well, why not pick this degree and why not pick this career path? And he was miserable and he fought with depression and burnout of his own through all of that. And for listeners, like he is totally fine with me sharing his story,
yeah,
but he'll tell you today, like he is glad on that the path he's on is where he is now. But there are times when he's like, man, if only I had known then what I know now, kind of
yeah.
thing.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a perfect example too of like what I was kind of going to next here, which is like it's almost like this formula, right? Of like
mhm,
when you get to that point where you've gone through those different stages of, okay, I'm just going to work a little bit harder. I'm just going to keep spinning on this human hamster wheel to then,
mhm,
burning yourself out beyond your max and capacity you get to this point where it's like a trifecta, right? Where not
mhm,
only does the brain no longer see the effort as worth the reward, but you've also got no ways to create and foster natural good dopamine, things
right.
like hobbies and passions would normally do for us. And number three is you don't have any conscious energy going on for you because most of your energy is required for the subconscious reactions that are related
Mhm,
to fight or flight mode that you've
mhm,
got this maybe you have this conscious goal that says man oh man I want to do it a different way but because there's not enough energy for that conscious brain of yours to move yourself forward
mhm,
the subconscious is what moves you forward instead and that's
mhm,
Kaylee what you were kind of talking about earlier right is like this subconscious mindset that keeps us stuck in patterns of our past
right.
and I'm sure you talk about this all the time and I do too but I want to hear it from you is why does the subconscious keep us so stuck?
So to me, especially in fight or flight mode, the best way I can think to describe it is um, at that point, our brain says, okay, I just got to make it 5 minutes. So everything that doesn't have to happen 5 minutes from now, the brain
Yeah.
goes, that's not important. That's not important. That's not. And so it shuts down on things like goal setting because it turns all of its energy into survival.
hmm
The funny thing is, even systems like our digestive system kicks off because our brain says, I don't need to eat for the next 5 minutes. I just need to either fight my way out of this. I need to keep pushing forward, or I need to either like get out of here, or I need to just completely shut down and freeze. I mean, that's the other one that
hmm
we can run into. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That was me to a T about like 3 years ago. I would get up in the morning, I'd have my
Yeah.
coffee, my little cortisol shot first thing. I did not
Mhm.
eat breakfast. I still struggle to eat breakfast. But then like before I knew it, it was like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'd be like, why am I so irritable right now? And then I'd be like, oh yeah, Peter,
Mhm.
that's why. It's because you haven't eaten all day.
Yep.
But when you're exactly right. When you're in that place, your brain is literally only thinking about what do I need to do right now to get ahead, as opposed
Mm-hmm.
to what does my body need in order for me to be able to get ahead. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, all that to say, for all of you listening out here and are resonating with this right now, is that most likely you're probably not doing anything wrong, right? The
Mm-hmm.
reason that you feel like maybe you're falling behind probably has nothing to do with what you're doing. It's just that your brain is not in a position to be able to focus on goals. And
Right.
so that's what we're going to dive into next here is what do we do about it? And
Right.
so Kaylee's got kind of three big pieces here that we're going to talk about. I'll kind of intro each one of them and kind of turn it over to Kaylee to give us some of the in-depths here. But number one, and oh my goodness, folks, this is a toughie, not as easy as it may sound, but number one, you've got to be clear on the goal. And oftentimes
Mm-hmm.
that means redefining the goal. Kaylee, talk to us a little bit
Mm-hmm.
about what that means.
Yeah, so we hear about goals often, and we hear the acronyms, right? The SMART goals or things like that. And the reality is that goals to me, like the term goals needs to be the little steps. So we need to switch that over into talking about our vision or our intention on things. We need to get that clear picture of what's ahead of us. And what I mean by that is get as specific as you want to be. If you have a dream of having a blue, I don't know, ranch style house with like a bedroom upstairs and two downstairs. I don't know, but like get as specific as you want. But the more specific you are, the more clear your brain can then say, like I said in the beginning, those parts of the brain that plan out how to get there, they will start to move and say, okay, now we can set some goals. Now we can set some places where how do I get to that particular house? How do I start to look for that house existing out there or whatever it is?
Hmm.
If it's a career, it's the same thing. Get as clear as you can. Don't worry if it doesn't exist, because listen, there are going to be lawyers doing AI specific work here in the next several years. That did not
Yeah.
exist 5 years ago. So please don't think about it as does
Yep.
it exist? Just think about the biggest dream that you have and be as specific as you can with it.
And I love to, and I think it's worth just reiterating, right, is this whole distinction between goals and intentions. Because, like you
Mhm.
mentioned, right, we get so, especially in the workplace, right, we get so tied up in like setting goals for ourselves. And not that goals are a bad thing, right? It's just that
Right.
goals oftentimes come with so much more added pressure behind them as
Mhm.
opposed to intentions, where an intention doesn't necessarily have a defined outcome, right? An intention can just be a way that you go about living your life. And one of the things that worked, miracles for me, and I do it every time I start thinking about new goals for myself, is anytime that I have like, okay, I wanna, I don't know, I wanna get rich and famous and like be this like famous mindset coach, right? Then I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, Peter, settle down for a second. Why? Ask why five
Mm.
times. Why is it that you want that thing? Another one, let's just take a good example for all of us millennials. I want the house. I want to be able to afford a house because, yeah, that's kind of what I expected right now. Why do you want a house? Well, because it would make me feel more comfortable. It would make me feel more financially safe knowing that I've got something that's mine. Okay, why do you want that? Well, it makes me feel more calm and less stressed about
Mm.
finances, right? And so it's eventually you kind of get down to more of a
Mm.
feeling. You realize that, oh, maybe I don't want this thing. Maybe I just want to feel a certain way. And I'll
Mhm.
be darned, there's a plethora of other things that I could be doing right now to foster that same feeling. And so, again, it all just goes back to that whole idea of like, what are you really fighting for here? Are you fighting for a goal or are you fighting for an intention? And Kaylee, I'm going to ask you to speak on this too, because I love this point that you brought up around like a goals inventory of like,
Mhm.
what are your goals versus what are the goals of somebody else?
Mhm. Yeah, because I think a lot of times and it goes back to your why, like asking why, because sometimes when we answer that, we go, well, because so and so told me so. And so checking in with yourself, and one of my favorite things that we can do for ourselves is to honor ourselves by really looking at what we need. I was talking about this earlier with somebody else, but the movie Avatar, like the first one, I have to say that now because there's more than one,
Yeah.
but in the movie, they talk about, their greeting is I see you. And it's a very, very honoring way of greeting people. And yet I think when we're looking at ourselves and we're looking at those goals, like the honor is to say, like, I see myself, like I'm looking at myself and what I need
Mm,
right now, and not looking at, okay, well, what will make other people happy in this moment? Unless that's something that we need. If we,
yeah.
I'm always going to give that caveat. Like some of us deeply need to not to make people happy in without sacrificing ourselves, but that it's our core need to serve others or something like that.
Yeah. I
Um,
love that.
yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like this whole idea of like, are you, working towards this goal that is, truly something that you want for yourself, or and that
Mhm.
you, or is it something that like somebody else has come along and say, hey, you saw somebody else be successful doing it this way, right? And we get into
Mhm.
that, for me at least, that's where I got into like imposter syndrome, right? Where it was all about like,
Mhm.
oh, well, I see so and so doing something the right way out there, so I'm going to pretend to do that. And it just gets you so much off course than you originally were in the first place. So, um,
Well, and I hear a lot of people talk about, like when I'm talking with people about their career goals, they talk about, well, I see my mom or my dad or brother, sister, whoever, like doing this, and they seem to be happy. So maybe I will be too. When that,
mhm,
it may not be true. Like we may
yeah.
be completely different from our family members.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, I think the first and foremost here is again getting really clear on the goal, aka intention,
Hmm.
and being able to understand and potentially even redefine what that means for you, as opposed to, are you working towards a goal that's maybe been conditioned for you based on
Hmm.
society's expectations and your appearance? And then the second thing that I think is so huge here is going back to this whole idea of, you know, for so many millennials, we don't have hobbies and passions anymore. And why is that relevant to goals? Is Kaylee, you're going to talk a lot more about this, but
Hmm.
this whole idea of like, what does, the ability of having passions and hobbies in your life, what does that do for your nervous system? What does that do for your natural hormone regulation? And why is it so important?
So hobbies take off the pressure in some ways. With hobbies, we can explore things without feeling like we have to commit long term to them. And so, because there's so much science behind the value of play, and as adults, our hobbies are often our version of play. There are time that's unstructured or that's a little bit more permission to experiment and explore. And so, there's that freedom and that creativity there that gives us that kind of new kind of re-experiencing of something pleasurable.
Yeah.
And so to me, hobbies are so valuable, even if you only try them one time. Like a hobby
Yeah.
does not have to be something that you're, again, we don't want you to have to commit to it long term. If you love it for a month and then you're done, okay. Like the number of perler beads I have in my house right now because my kids are done with them, like it's fine. It's totally fine.
Yeah.
Um, but hobbies can be things that we just try once and say, it was okay, but maybe not again.
Hmm. And yeah, it's easier said than done, right? Because again,
Hmm.
how many of us have gone so much of the past 15 to 20 years dedicating
Yeah.
ourselves to the job and the career that either we don't have hobbies, period, or maybe we've just
Mhm.
forgotten about them for so long that we're like, oh, hobbies. Like I think others can probably resonate with this. It's like when you're in a conversation with somebody that you meet for the first time and they're like, so what do you do for fun?
Yeah.
And I'm like,
What
but
fun.
now, I'll
Yeah.
say I was talking to Kaylee about this earlier. I'm like, my my hobbies lately are adult coloring books.
Hmm.
And
Mm.
I'm telling you what, I'm not lying to you, walking. Walking is
Mm-hmm.
my hobby. Like, I'm serious. If I don't get in like a good 6 to 7 walks per day, and I'm not talking like a mile or whatever, I'm just talking like I walk around the block. I don't know what. I mean, it's maybe it's just the being outside and the slight bit of exercise, but like it does wonders for me. Walking is
Mm-hmm.
my hobby. And so I say that just because I think that we need to take some of the pressure off of the conversation of like,
Right.
what does it mean and what are your options for hobbies? Um,
Mm-hmm.
because it doesn't have to be anything fancy, right? The way
Yeah.
that I now look at hobbies is hobbies are my natural way to get my dopamine kick, my
Mm-hmm.
serotonin kicks, right? Versus beforehand, my dopamine kicks came from doom scrolling on social media, which don't get me wrong, I still do from time to time, but the amazing thing that happens when you're doing something that brings you joy, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's something simple or something that also makes a difference in the world of others too, what it does for your brain and dopamine, whew, craziness, right? But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Kaylee, what would be your tips, I guess, for people in terms of like finding their hobbies or passions?
Yeah. So this may sound like the weirdest tip in the world, but you can absolutely start with, Googling a list of hobbies and just going down the list and maybe you rate them. You say, I'm going to try one new hobby. It depends on what it is, but one new hobby a day or a week or
Yeah.
whatever. And then when you're done, say, that was a, 2 out of 10, probably not going to do again. And that one's a 9 out of 10. I need to try it some more, but
Mm-hmm.
there is nothing wrong. Like you could have a hobby of testing hobbies for a little bit if you
Ooh, I
wanted to do
like
that.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And yeah,
yeah.
I love that idea of rating them afterwards to be able to kind of give yourself that almost like rating what dopamine did you get from that? Did you get a high boost of
Right.
dopamine or
Yeah.
no? No, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I think a lot of people are probably thinking too right now, like, well, I don't even have time for hobbies. Like work takes up all of my time, right? And,
Mm-hmm.
Kaylee, I don't know what your take on that is, but like for me at least, it's like nobody's going to hand you a platter of extra time back in your day, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Yeah.
about carving out that time strategically for yourself. And again, it doesn't have to be anything crazy. Again, for me, it's a couple of times a day in my schedule during my workday. It's a 10-minute walk
Mm-hmm.
outside. And like I've done something that's brought me joy and refreshed me, right? So,
And honestly, I think if you carve out the time, and again, it doesn't have to be long. I started saying to myself before I start work, I'm just gonna sit for 5 minutes or whatever. And at first, I was like, I don't have time. I have like 15 to 20 minutes at this point, and I did not intentionally carve out 15 to 20. I simply said before I start work, I'm going to do this, and then that time showed up because I prioritized it. So
yeah,
yeah.
totally. So far,
Mhm.
we've talked about when we talk about like that, trifecta of things going on, right? We talked about like the brain
Mhm.
no longer sees the effort as worth a reward. And really, the solution to that sometimes comes down to that whole idea of potentially it's time to redefine the goal. Is what you've
Mhm.
been working towards for so long really the thing that you want? And it's okay if it's not. It's up to you then to say, what is it that you really do want? And asking yourself again, why 5 times? We talked about other ways to naturally promote good dopamine through things like hobbies and passions. And then I think in terms of just like keeping your motivation going is the other big one. And I am a huge fan of this specific strategy. Kaylee, talk to us through it, micro-tasking and micro goals.
So the smaller that you can break something down and then celebrate it, the better it's going to be. The idea behind it is that we are motivated by rewards. And so if you author of, I think it's called Tiny Habits, but BJ Foggy talks about, if you can break something down into flossing one tooth,
Yep.
you're probably going to floss more than one tooth. That is okay. But like if you do that and then celebrate it, your brain gets that hit. It goes, oh, hey, I might want to do that again because I felt good for a second when I did that thing. And you
Mm-hmm.
grow on it over time. But the smaller the task is, the more chances you have to celebrate when
Yeah.
you accomplish it. So,
Exactly. And I think it's
mhm.
just, I think maybe it's part of the conditioning for so many of us as millennials growing up with parents and grandparents and a society that really, again, kind of put all that pressure on us that we feel like we have to achieve this. We set this huge, gargantuous goal for
Mhm.
ourselves, and we feel like we have to achieve it tomorrow. Versus, for me at least, I know like I was doing some spring cleaning the other weekend, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. But I
Mhm.
literally just broke it down in terms of like, okay, the first thing I need to do is find my mop and bucket. I don't even know where
Mhm.
it was. I had to go down to storage and get it, right? And then like break down the next task. Okay, let me just clean the windows. Let me just clean the living room floor, right? And it was like when I accomplished
Mhm.
that one tiny thing, then all of a sudden it was like, okay, reward recognized, dopamine released. Now I've got the motivation to go on to the next thing on that list and the next thing. And then before you know it, here you are.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was a couple hours later, but now I've accomplished this much larger goal through microtasking as opposed to what I would have done before, which is like, okay, power through it all until it's all done at once, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I'm telling y'all, this one changed the game for me. Microtasking,
Mhm.
micro goals, break it down so that your brain has a opportunity, right, Keely,
Mhm.
to
It has a
recognize the
chance to
reward.
celebrate.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
Um, and if you need a really easy tool to celebrate, my favorite is called a to-do and a to-do list. So your to-do list, it's gonna be a whiteboard. It's gonna be something you can remove items from because you then move them over to your to-do list that looks really pretty and you've decorated it so that you feel good when you put things on it because you're celebrating every time. It's like, clean that window. I cleaned that window and it's on your to-do list now, kind of thing.
Uh-huh. I'm stealing that. To
So
do and to do list. I like
I
that.
love that one. I don't know where I might have made it up. I might have heard it at this point. I don't know. My brain.
Uh-huh. But yeah, I mean, I think the whole idea is, I talk about this all the time on other episodes of the podcast and on social media, right? Is like, especially when we're talking about like burnout recovery, so much of it is about reparenting your brain because your brain is so used to doing things in a certain way. And especially as it relates to goals, where again, we just keep going, 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 going until we accomplish it versus retraining your retraining your dopamine system, right? So that your brain is because it's when you come out on the quote unquote other side of burnout, let's be real folks, burnout doesn't just go away, right? It's something that you just manage better, you're more aware of it. But
Process.
yeah, when you become more aware of the things that are actually happening in your brain and body, and you're kind of coming out on what you might call, the recovery side of things, your dopamine system's not just going to kick back on right away, right? Like it's going to take
Mhm.
time for your dopamine system to kind of relearn, oh, this is when I naturally release dopamine as opposed to those cheap
Mhm.
hits that we maybe sought before with things like, our iced coffee addictions and doom scrolling on social media.
Mhm.
So I think that's just important for people to hear too, is like this is not an overnight process, right? Like this is something where it's literally reteaching and retraining your brain what does, whether it's success or happiness, whatever the intention, whatever the goal is for you, really being able to restructure that concept in your brain so that you're not burning yourself out for something that you don't actually want in the first place, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
just to kind of recap for us, yeah, three big things is number one, set the intention, right? Redefining the goal if you need to. Number two, being gentle with yourself, giving yourself some grace with rediscovering maybe or discovering in the first place some of those hobbies and passions. And number three, retraining your brain's dopamine system with microtasking. Kaylee, I'm going to put you on the spot here. If there was any other, I don't know, bonus tip that you were to give folks in terms of
Ooh.
getting back your motivation or sense of goals, what would it be?
I mean, I gave you the to-do and to-do list. Now I'm on the spot, huh?
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, that was a good one. Yeah.
no, I think like what you said before about just normalizing all of this and that I want people's takeaway to be that it's not that you have to think harder or that you have to do more, but that there are systems within your body that need to be cared for differently. And when we start caring for them the ways that they need to be cared for by reducing that stress, by increasing that dopamine and everything, that's where we start to see our energies levels rise. We need to be less hard on ourselves. Like if that was the
Yes.
one thing I would want people to hear, it's like don't be hard on yourself, because this is a systemic thing that takes a lot of compassion and a lot of work to regrow from.
Oh, so good. And yeah, right. Like society already puts so much pressure on us as it is.
Mhm.
Like, just take a little bit of the pressure off by not putting so much of it on yourself, right? um,
Mhm. Yeah.
and yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. I forget who I was talking about, but this like aha moment came up for me where it was like, I need to start doing more of the things that my body needs instead of what my
Mhm.
brain wants,
Yeah.
right? Like my brain wants to go do this thing, but it's like, what does my body need right now? And a lot of the
Mhm.
times, what it needs is just an opportunity to get back into homeostasis so that I can be
Mhm.
my best self and actually think about what I want to do next, right? So,
Yeah.
Kaylee, thank you so much. Obviously,
Yeah.
y'all, I didn't say this at the beginning, but yeah, this season, super excited for kind of this lineup of other millennials out there that are also mental health professionals that'll be able to kind of share
Mhm.
that additional perspective with us. So, Kaylee, super excited to have you on as your debut today, and super
Thank you.
excited for a couple of other episodes that we're going to have you on as well. But in the meantime, in terms of what you're doing now with career coaching, tell us a little bit
Mm.
about where we can find out more about what you do.
Yeah, so you can find me pretty much anywhere with the handle LP Career Coach. Instagram, TikTok, all the places. And then you can also, if you want to get in touch with me, you can always go to my website at mycareercoach.online. I'm actually going to be here pretty soon launching a Best Life program where it focuses on all the elements. I joke that I've looked everywhere. I really have, and I can't find anything like it. And I'm not just saying that, but like
Yeah.
it includes kind of those elements of recovering from burnout, shifting our mindsets, building self-compassion, setting career goals. All of those pieces are incorporated into this because I believe that living our best lives comes with finding that harmony within ourselves for embracing all the pieces of us and not just, just our jobs or just our
Yeah.
anything really. So.
100%. And yeah, I mean, Kaylee, I know you're not going to toot your horn, but I'm going to toot it for you because it's like, this is exactly what I think so many of us need right now because there's
um,
so many of these, like, spammy coaches out there. They're like, let me help you build your
I
own
know.
business on the side. And like, that's going to end your burnout. And I'm like, I've been there, done that. It just burned me out all over again. So, like, to have somebody that truly understands all of this from the therapy side of things that's truly in it to actually help people. Yeah, I just applaud you for what you do. So thank you again
Thank you.
for being part of this. And thank you all, my besties out there, for tuning in to another episode of the Millennial Reset. I know I, too, am horrible at asking for support, but I'm just going to say it. If you liked what you heard today, I would just greatly appreciate it if you could share this with one of your millennial besties, follow and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you really want to help me out, you could go and rate the podcast wherever you listen, but super appreciate all of your support. And I hope to see you all next time on the next episode of the Millennial Reset.